The past couple of years, I've been dealing with like faith issues and struggling with belief, struggling with God and the concept of God. And, and it's good that later on we're talking about Jordan Peterson, because I feel like me and him might have more in common than I would like to admit. But this year, I challenged myself to actually read the entire Bible, right? Which, again, that sounds crazy for me to be a Christian all my life, but to not have ever read the entire Bible. But newsflash, that's actually not as unusual as you may think. A lot of people who are Christians, or a lot of people who go to church, they don't read the Bible, or they have not read large portion of the Bible. They might read the Gospels a little bit. Maybe they'll read Paul's letters. A lot of people might read, Genesis and, Exodus, the story of Moses, but most people have not read the entire Bible. They haven't read First and Second Kings. They haven't read Peter. They haven't read, the book of John. They haven't read First and Second Chronicles. They haven't read the book of Enoch. They haven't read Ruth. They haven't read their Bible. And so I said to myself, hey, if I'm having these questions about God and doubts about my faith, I owe it to myself to actually read this damn thing. So I think I started last year to read the Bible front to back, all the books, right? And I did a pretty good job, because normally I get to Leviticus and I just fall off. I'm like, this is a lot. And I'm trying to see if I could find the exact books that I skipped. Hold on. So Genesis, I read all of this straight up until Isaiah. When I got to Isaiah, I kind of started to get confused. I'm not gonna lie to you. And I really wanted to get to the New Testament. So I kind of skipped. I still have this chunk left to read of the Old Testament, but I skipped to the New Testament and I read every book in the New Testament, right? So I have that portion of the Bible left, for me to read. And reading the Bible, I fell in love with kind of the story within the story, or like the meaning and like the true, like, the way Jordan Peterson talks about the Bible. I get why it frustrates people that Jordan Peterson doesn't give straight answers to, does he believe in God and whatever. And again, I have problems with that as well. But when he discusses the Bible and kind of gets into like, the psychological meanings of certain things and, what the story is really trying to tell us, that's kind of how I fell in love with the Old Testament. All of the stories about David's life and, David, right? Like you hear about David and, Bathsheba, David and Goliath. Dude, David was on the run from, I think it was King Saul, for like most of his youth. And I mean, like he had this dude trying to kill him. David was also a horrible father, right? One of his sons raped his daughter, and his other son wanted to avenge his daughter, his sister's honor, and kill the other son, right? Different mom, so you know how that goes. I mean, just all of this. Job, the stories within the Bible are so rich and so, like, you learn a lot about human nature by reading these stories. And then the New Testament, right? The story of Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, and hearing how he related to his disciples, right? Then you get Paul, and Paul, having this belief that's so strong that he's out there getting beaten and everything like that, right? You have Peter, and you have the Book of Acts, which goes through the disciples, as they're out there, going through their ministry and everything, right? So it's an incredible book that I'm reading. But then there are parts of that as you're reading when you're like, this don't make no sense in certain respects. And there's no way for you to go and really have these conversations saying, hey, I don't think this makes that much sense. You find out that the flood story shares like 70% of the elements in like the flood story is taken from the the Epic of Gilgamesh. All right, look at this. The story of Noah may be part of the Abrahamic canon, but the legend of the Great Flood almost certainly has pre-biblical origins, rooted in the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. The Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh dates back nearly 5,000 years and is thought to be perhaps the oldest written tale on the planet. Okay, so if it's the same, but one story is significantly older than the other one, it means the Bible got this from another story, which means the story in the Bible is not true, or it's not true in the way that it is being presented as true. And that bothered me. And I started, I signed up for this dude. His name is Bart Ehrman, right? He's like a biblical scholar, New Testament, knows this stuff. And he has this online class that I signed up for, right? Paid for it. Cause I'm like, I gotta learn more. And you study and you realize, oh, yo, a lot of the stuff here is believed by biblical scholars, both atheist and Christian scholars, to be exaggerations, to be historically inaccurate. And I can go on and on and on. And I'm not someone that I can hear these things and it doesn't bother me, right? So as I'm finishing up reading the New Testament, I'm having to deal with the reality of these stories in this Bible that you've been, told is the word of God. They have some errors, some mistakes. And then there are parts of the Bible that you read that, it just it's like, wait a minute, this is like a good thing that I'm reading about. Like the genocide that you read about where the Israelites will go and like storm a village or a people and leave nobody alive. Like they kill everybody, women, children. You know what? I'm going to find this too, because this bothered me a lot. All right, now then make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives. So basically, the Israelites, they were married to these women who were not Israelites, foreign women. And, because they wanted to get back in lockstep with God, Ezra, who's a prophet, he instructs them, hey, you should go ahead and we need to get back, leave those foreign women and let's get right back on track. And so these dudes who were married to these foreign women, they just abandoned them. Do you know what happened to those women who were foreigners married to these Israelites who just walked out on them? Women at this point in history cannot survive, right? You think their native men were going to raise some bastard kids that you had with some Israelite dude? Of course they weren't going to do that. And so you read that and you're like, whoa. Or you'll read the stuff about, let's go to this one here. Deuteronomy, 7th chapter, the 1st to the 2nd. NIV version. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show no mercy. No mercy. Let's keep going. Deuteronomy, the 20th chapter, verse 16 through 18. However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. Let's go to 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter, the 2nd to the 3rd verse. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belong to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Joshua, the 6th chapter, 21st verse. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle and donkeys. Then we have Numbers, the 31st chapter, the 1st to the 18th verse. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. So now we have some sexual slavery in here as well, right? And of course, it gives this thing about the context, their divine judgments. And the goal was to prevent Israel from being led astray. But, and again, I get it. Hyperbolic war rhetoric, typical of ancient Near Eastern literature. I got you. But again, I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, whoa. So I have the parts of the Bible that, I don't think are historically true or are accurate. Like, the flood story. I have the parts like this where I'm like, this is horrific stuff that I'm reading about. This is preached about, by pastors all the time. I'm not going to pretend like I haven't heard a pastor preach about this stuff in the past. I have heard those things. I think historically speaking, we kind of, when you're a Christian and you're going to church, you always put yourself in the position of the Israelites, which is ironic because, again, as an African American, I'm not a Jew. I'm not an Israelite, right? Like, I'm not. Even though the Hebrew Israelites would have something else to say about that, right? So we put ourselves in the position of the Israelites when we are reading the Bible and we're, in church and, we're listening to the pastor get into a sermon. And, you can turn these things into like, yes, God is the war general and he helped them, defeat armies that were like 3-4 times their sizes. And, we hear those things and we hear about, this is genocide. Like, this is actual genocide. Leave no women alive, no children, children alive. Take the wives who haven't slept with men for yourselves, which again is sexual slavery. Like, it's not like those women, would have been enthusiastic to marry the men who killed all of their fathers and their grandfathers and their brothers and their sons, etc., etc. Again, we don't really, because of how these stories are given to us and how they're preached to us and how we read them, we put ourselves into the position of the Israelites. But you would have to imagine when God is instructing the Israelites to kill everybody and leave no one alive and take their daughters for yourselves and whatever, right? Everyone in the village isn't guilty of something. And they were guilty of worshiping gods that weren't Yahweh, right? Like, one thing you have to understand about the Bible is the Bible, even though it is not consistent at times, but it is written about a group of people and their God amongst many groups of people and their gods, right? And so the mortal sin that was committed here was these other individuals were not worshiping Yahweh, and they were behaving in a way and they were acting in a way that were, that were despicable, deplorable, etc., etc. Cool, got you. You would imagine, you can say that the women have got to go too, right? I'm not a sexist. Women are out there doing wild stuff. Hey, you got to go too. The babies, the infants, why do they have to die? Right? Like, think about how much Christians today, right? The religious right, Christian nationalism and everything, how they talk about, abortion, the issue of abortion and how abortion is morally wrong and everything. God knew you in your stomach. Cool. But when you got verses in the Bible where God, again, let's go back here, go to the verses, where God is instructing them to kill the young, to kill the children and the infants. You can't have no abortion conversation about this. You see what I'm saying? Like, what conversation can you have about abortion when we have within the text that, yeah, God is kind of cool with killing infants and babies, depending on the context, right? In this context here, these were babies and infants who were the children of wicked people. And again, wicked people, by this definition, these were individuals that were not living up to the standard of God and his ways. These people weren't necessarily when we think wicked in a Western, in an American context, even if you're not religious, you think really, really bad, like Hitler or somebody, right? They weren't necessarily like that. They just weren't living the life that the Israelites were being asked to live by Yahweh. Thus, that made them wicked, and they were, serving other gods. And again, I'll give you the women. Hey, lady, you out there worshiping Baal or whatever, you got to go too. I'm granting you the women. I'm not even using the women and children argument. Take the women out of here. What, the infants? An infant, by definition, has no recollection of what's going on. They don't know who's doing what. They don't know who Yahweh is. They don't know who Baal is. They don't know anything. They are infants. By definition, they don't know shit. Kill them too? And so I don't understand how Christians, the Christian right, and this is something that, really, if the left wanted to actually, use the word against these people, this is how you could do it. Yeah, God is fine with killing infants and children. So why would God necessarily be against abortion when he was okay with getting rid of infants and children of wicked people? By definition, if you are a Christian, non-believers having sex, or people who are not living up, because we know a whole bunch of Christians have sex. By definition, these individuals are outside of the law of the Old Testament. And so in the eyes of Yahweh, these individuals would be pagans for the most part. So you can make an argument, if you are a Christian, that pagans aborting children is in lockstep with the word of God to a certain degree. But again, I'm reading these things and I'm like, yo, this is a lot for me to handle. I can't square these things in my soul and my psyche, that this stuff is being advocated for. This stuff is being justified. The Bible is calling for, commanding. If you believe the word, this is from God. God is telling them, kill these infants, kill these women, kill these children, kill the animals. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, yo, again, you kind of hear these things preached in a certain way, whatever. But when you read it and the way that I was reading it, it really caused me to kind of look into myself like, oh man, like this is, yeah. So that was causing me to kind of have some questions about my faith, right? And then the last thing that happened is I'm reading the New Testament, right? I'm reading, the New Testament, and we get to like Paul and Paul's letters, right? So I'm reading Paul's letters, and a couple of things were actually clear to me as I'm reading Paul's letters. Thing number one, Paul was absolutely underneath the impression that Jesus was coming back in his lifetime. And I'm going to the text to show y'all this. All right, here we go. 1 Thessalonians, the 4th chapter, the 15th to the 17th verse. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven, and we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Right? Let's go to 1 Corinthians, 7th chapter, 29th to the 31st verse. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they don't. Those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. Wait, did I read that right? From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not. Those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away. Romans, the 13th chapter, the 11th to the 12th verse. And do this, understanding the present time, the hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. Philippians, 4th chapter, the 5th verse. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, the 51st to the 52nd verse. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. Right? Now, scholarly reflection. Many scholars believe Paul's earlier letters, like 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians, show a stronger sense of imminent eschatology. Later letters seem to moderate this urgency. Absolutely. Some suggest that as time passed and Jesus did not return, Paul may have refined or reinterpreted his expectation, not denying the return, but recognizing it might not occur as quickly as first thought, right? And so I read that, right? Again, I'm reading the Bible, and so I'm reading Paul, and I'm like, wait a minute, Paul thinks that this is happening like now, right? Now this I was not aware of at all, right? I never got to read the Paul letters growing up, right? Growing up, I read the Gospels over and over again. Like I would sit in church when the pastor was preaching and like pull out the Bibles in the back of the pew and just read the Gospels all, because I just love reading, Jesus' words and, the parables and everything. Even the ones that I couldn't understand at the time as a child, I love to read them, right? So I never read the Paul letters. Once I read the Paul letters, though, the Paul letters are where I'm like, okay, Paul thought this was happening now. You have to read the actual letters, like read the whole book. I'm giving you these like verses and stuff, and I don't want you to think that I'm kind of just taking things out of context. Read the entire. There's an urgency to Paul where you're reading it and you're like, oh yeah, he thinks this is happening now. And so as I'm reading it, I'm like, how could Paul be so like wrong, right? And because Paul was so wrong about the return of Jesus, it makes me look at Paul through a different light. Because remember, Paul never met Jesus. Paul didn't have no relationship with Jesus at all. Paul was a persecutor of Christians. And as the text says, he's He was walking. Well, he wasn't walking. He was on his horse, I think. And, he had a vision. A blinding light came down. And Jesus said, Paul, why are you persecuting me? Paul was blind for a couple of days. And then eventually he was Saul before. Then he becomes Paul. And now he's a believer. He's an apostle. And he's preaching the gospel, right? That's what the text says, right? But again, I'm reading this now. And I'm like, well, if Paul got this stuff so wrong, again, he got the return of Jesus so wrong. And I don't hear this addressed that often by ministers, pastors, deacons, spiritual leaders. If Paul got this stuff so wrong, how do you not look at his, I'm trying to be respectful here. How do you not look at Paul's kind of vision with Jesus or whatever and question it though? Because again, you would think Jesus would have told Paul, I'm not coming back right now, right? Like, I mean, Paul spreading misinformation. He's writing. He's like, part of the reason why he's writing these letters is the churches that he's founding and talking to. They're getting work. Like they're watching their friends die. And they're like, hey man, I thought this was going to happen, right? He believed it was happening then, right now. Like it's happening tomorrow. That's why when Paul gives advice, and you have to read everything in context. When he's saying that, if you don't have a wife, it don't matter. If you're a slave, it don't matter. Like who cares about slavery, whatever, right? Like, the slave and the free are the same in Christ. If you don't have a wife, who cares? Like this is all gonna be over. He's giving us advice, and you have to read about Paul through this context, because otherwise you can have people living a life that they ain't really meant to live. Right? Because if the world is ending tomorrow, then yeah, who cares about getting married and whatever and all that stuff? Like none of this matters, really, right? But it didn't happen. So how could Paul get this stuff so wrong, but had a vision that was from Jesus, right? Again, these thoughts they feel like they fall underneath the category of blasphemous as when you're a Christian, because again, like there's not really like space for like conversation and doubt. At least I didn't feel like there was. So I'm reading this and I'm like, yo, how could you not look at Paul's conversation with Jesus or his experience with Jesus through a different light now that we know that he was so wrong about the return? It didn't happen. And again, it's 2025. Like Paul wasn't a little wrong. Paul was. Jesus died around like 30 to 33 AD. Paul might have started preaching this thing maybe like 5 years later, like 1900 years some change, right? Like he wasn't off he was off a lot of it. And so again, all of these things, I'm reading the Bible. These things are causing me to have much doubt. Or a little bit of doubt. Again, I'm being honest, right? I'm being honest. I'm reading the Bible every day. I'm reading it on the bus. I'm reading it on the train. I'm reading it at work, right? I'm at the station. I'm at a computer station. I just sit there all day long. And so I read the Bible. I'm learning. I'm reading. And I am captivated. I am so invested in this where I'm like, I got to get to the next book. I got to get to the next chapter. I'm reading as fast as I can, but with understanding, because there were times where I got confused and I had to like take a step back, reread. And then the last thing was the man himself, Jesus Christ. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. I repeat, truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. What things? These things. Everything between this and this. These things described here. Well, obviously, they all died. The disciples all dead. Everyone in that time is dead. All their children are dead. And again, there's been like, reinterpretations or here's what he really meant and all that stuff. And I got you. Again, I'm not even saying that that's not true. But this generation means this generation. That's what it means. And so again, I have all of these questions. I have all of these concerns There's nowhere to really go and have a conversation without people thinking that you're some type of, heretic or, doubting Thomas. And so you're just stuck with it, or you're left with these things. I speak with my brother about it all the time. My younger brother, who I talk to. Actually, me and him talked last night or Sunday. Actually, Sunday we talked, and we had this conversation. And I was telling him, yeah, not about this specifically, but about like the doubts and questions that I have. And I do have questions. I've looked into okay, the people who don't believe in the resurrection, I've looked into what their explanations are. And their explanations, quite frankly, it's like, okay, well, the disciples just had visions. And I'm like, all of them? Even Paul? All of them just had, when they saw Jesus, they had visions. So they thought that they saw something. Okay, well then how was the tomb empty? Oh, they just went to the wrong tomb. Well, surely when Christianity was spreading, Rome, if Rome wanted to put the stop to all of this Jesus talk, they would have just produced the body, right? And I have all of these questions because, again, those arguments to me, I'm like, ah. And Paul, again, we have Paul's own words about the things that he went through, the persecution that he went through. Again, it's just so hard for me to make a decision on this, right? Because in my mind, I'm always like, well, I was born with this religion. I was raised in this religion, right? So do I believe these things because I believe them to be true on the basis of, the book itself, the story itself? Or do I believe these things because I was raised in this tradition, right? Meaning, if I was raised in a Middle Eastern country, would I have found Jesus, or would I be saying, all honor due to Allah? And I'm obsessed with this question, and I'm trying to get down to the truth and get down to, okay, I need to search myself, search my soul, I want to get to the truth. Whatever the truth is, I'm not comfortable just believing something for the sake of believing something. That's not me. That's not how I'm built. And so I have these questions, and I'm going on this journey. And this was a long way for me getting to, yes, I left the church because I wanted to focus on my health. That is true. My physical health and my mental health. That is not a lie, and it wasn't an excuse. I would probably still be playing, if not for these things. But another factor that has been weighing on me in the recent weeks have been these questions, have been these doubts, have been these feelings about everything as it pertains to the Bible, religion, God, and what do I believe? What don't I believe? Even the entire, God, the master of the universe, the Alpha and the Omega, the supreme being, he makes everybody. Then he regrets it, and so he kills them all in the flood. Then the earth repopulates itself. He chooses these group of people, the Israelites, to be his special group of people, right? For some reason, amongst the entire world of people, and then they go to get land, this and that, and then things happen, and then eventually he sends his son down to die for humanity's sins. And why the chosen people for, though? Why not just send the savior to save everybody if that's the ultimate goal? I don't understand. Right. Similarly, in Revelation, it talks about that Jesus eventually defeats the devil. Okay, but why not just defeat the devil? Better yet, why allow the devil to roam at all on earth? For what purpose? Does it serve to have the devil roaming earth? I don't understand why, right? And so again, I have these questions. I have these things that I'm struggling with, these things that I'm dealing with, and because I have these things, stepping away was good in order for me to kind of really search myself, search my soul, read the text, find myself, and find what I believe. It's kind of hard to kind of get down to what you believe when you're in the religious environment. I'm hoping that eventually I will have I'll make a decision. I'll make a declaration of, hey, I believe this.